Now that we have our partial view in place and showing who we are as a user who's logged in, let's go ahead and make it so that when we click on this, we can actually see something about our user, maybe a user profile page. So let's jump back into our code. We'll stop. And one of the important things here is that once we set up that profile, we can actually link to it here and finish out our user nav partial view. So let's go ahead and kind of close these pieces out for now. Another thing to note, even though I already closed it, is that now that we have this partial, we don't have to jump back into underscore layout in order to make changes to that partial. We can just work within the partial view itself, and we know that we've made that action reference here. So it actually helps us to not have to jump in and out of so many pieces. We can now have this unit of work that is the user nav partial when we want to go in and make changes. All right, so from our account controller, let's go ahead and twirl closed our user nav partial action, and let's add another one. So public action result, and this one will just be called user profile. And for now, we'll return a view. The steps that we'll need to go through will be to capture the user again. This will be the logged in user. We'll want to retrieve the user from the database. So this is actually going to be very simple to the partial. We're going to want to populate our user profile view model and then return the view with the view model. So let's actually work our way toward the view this time since we kind of know where we're heading. So we're going to capture that logged in user. So I'm going to string username equals user.identity.name. And I'm getting the red squiggles because I need to make sure I put my parentheses there. All right, so I capture my username, and then I'm going to do another using statement for my database context. So you'll notice here that this process I'm using is fairly consistent, especially when it comes to connecting to a database. So that idea of adding a using statement and declaring my context in there, those are really the common steps that you'll be doing every time you need to do something in your database. So even though you're like, well, he's writing the same code over and over again, this is more of a process that you need to begin to recognize that when you're connecting to your database and you're pulling data, this is just the model or practice that you need to take into doing that work. All right, so we're going to need a user profile view model, which we don't have currently. So I'm just going to copy that since I already typed it. I'm going to jump into my models, view models account. I'm going to right click, add class. And we'll create a user profile view model. And you'll also notice that I'm going to start speeding up in some of these lecture videos. And I just want to kind of call that out. And the reason for that is that this should be stuff that you are starting to become familiar with. So for me to sit here and explain everything that I'm doing may start to become a little boring for some of you. But I'm going to kind of work my way toward that. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting those properties that I want to show in my profile. So we've got first name, last name, email address. We can do gender. We will probably show what other data do we have in our database. Let's take a look and see that we may want to show. So we'll go back here, TBL user. We can do, if the user is an admin, the date that they created their account, their username, and we also need their ID. So we'll do, oh, that's a dummy one. Prop string username, prop date time, date create or account, or let's see, date created is what we'll call it. And prop bool is admin. And then I always like to put my ID field at the top, just personal preference. All right, so now that is our user profile view model. So let's jump back here into our action, and we just want to populate it. So let's start by declaring that user profile view model class. So we'll call this the profile VM, and then we'll initialize it down here. So we'll initialize that variable to be a new user profile view model. I'll do the inline initialization just because it's nice and quick. So profile VM dot date created. Oh, you know what we forgot? We need to get the user from the database. So here we will need to create a user. This will be our user DTO. Context.users. And we're going to do that first in default. So this is the row dot-username equals username. And again, this is username, the field or column out of the database. This username is the string that we declared up here. So where those two match is the row that we want. And then we'll do the same if. And this will be a little different. We'll say if user DTO equals null, then we'll want to return content and say invalid username. So we'll actually just send out a blank page with one line of text that says invalid username. All right, so now that we have our user DTO, we can start to pull values. So date created, email address, first name. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this little section here because I just keep typing it again. And then we'll say gender equals user DTO gender. I guess we have gender in our create view, our create action to create a user, but we're not actually saving it to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. And that may be something we need to revisit. All right, ID is user DTO.id. Is admin. So sometimes you run into that where you had an idea somewhere else and you realize that you lost that idea along the way. It happens to everybody. So a friend of mine once called that technical debt. So basically it's like I came up with an idea, I started to execute it, and then I either forgot about it or said I'll get back to it later. So you accumulate this technical debt of things that you need to go back and fix and change. Not to deviate this lecture video too far, I'm going to go ahead and just keep moving forward. I'll leave that commented out, but that's something we'll definitely need to go back and visit. Maybe after this video, I'll jump back and I'll show you how to add that gender. So we have our view model built. We did it within the context of our using statement for our WSAD DB context. And now we can take that view model and we'll send it to our view. So I'll right click, choose add view. We'll do user profile. I'm going to go ahead and choose the details template just as a starting point. Drop down, actually we'll just type it in, user profile view model tab. If your create a partial view is checked, you want to uncheck that, and then we'll go ahead and hit add. So Visual Studio will scaffold up for us a details view. So let's go ahead and just leave it as it is. Actually, I'm going to take out a couple small things. Let's see here. Actually, okay, the ID does not show. That was the one piece I wanted to make sure we excluded. We're not addressing the gender at this point, but we can leave it in there. It'll just come back as nothing. We have the date created, and it is admin. So let's just see what the default template does for us. So we'll go ahead and run it. Now, if we are already logged in, this is loading up our user profile. If we're already logged in, it should identify who we are and then present us with our user information. All right, not bad for a default template. So it says our first name, last name, email address, gender obviously isn't there, username, and then we have date created. So that's the date that we created our account, and then if it's an admin or not. So it rendered out a checkbox that is read only, and if it was true, it would be true, and if it's not true, it's empty. Not bad. So now we can come and look at this and we can make some adjustments. So I'm going to start off by getting rid of this H4 tag, put a space in my user profile H2 tag, leave our view bag there, that's fine. Other than that, everything looks reasonable. I don't really have any big complaints about changing that template for this purpose. But you can obviously go in and make significant changes if you'd like, make changes to it so that it has much better aesthetic feel, things of that nature. So now we've set up our profile page. We have our controller and our action in place, so now we need to go back and update our partial so that we can jump back into it. So we're going to stop our debug. We don't need to touch the controller for this. We actually just need to go into our account, user, nav partial, and update this A tag. So to do that, we could use the html.action link, or if we're going to mark out our own A tag, there's also another @URL. There's a URL helper, and we can say .action, and then we pass in that same action and controller, and it will generate out the URL for us. So this will be our user profile action off of our account controller. So we'll go ahead and save that. We'll just jump back to our code, or to our page, do a refresh, and I'm going to jump back to the home page. All right, so now that we're back at the home page, we can go ahead and click on our partial, and you can see down below that it's already linking. So we'll click that, and that brings us to our user profile. So we've now set up a partial view, created a user profile page, and the last step will be to be able to edit our profile.